All right, we're back at it again. We are covering the next two villages as we get to know our state, one village at a time. Now, I am feeling much more in a good mood. For one, I slept really good last night, but also I recently went fishing with my dad. He's up here visiting from the lower 48, and I flew him out to a very remote lake, which is very obviously not fished a whole lot because we caught some massive fish. It was like almost every cast we pulled in some very large brown trout. We were catching so many that we were limited by the law on how many we could take home. So we only took home a few fish. But I just ate one of them for lunch today. My dad's really good at preparing it. He put on flour and garlic and salt and pepper, and he just fried it up. Oh, man. And we had an amazing time fishing. It was a very remote place. I landed on a spot nearby with my little maul, my bush plane, and we really just enjoyed fishing there. So I'm not going to say where because that's just for me to know because I want to go back there. And if you announce such places on public platforms, then everyone goes. And that's kind of the whole point, is for people not to know. It's not like a big, huge secret, but I just don't want to announce it. But it was really great. And there's something about a man's soul being totally refreshed by just going fishing. Like, men, you need it. Like, figure out how to get out there and do it because, man, it's refreshing. Well, anyway, today we are covering the next two villages. We're still in the C's, covering the letter C. We're going through them alphabetically. And today we are doing Clark's Point and Coffman Cove. So here we go. Clark's Point rests on a spit in the northeastern shore of Nushagak Bay. Apologies for if I mispronounce it. Nushagak. I have not been in this area, so I don't know how the locals pronounce this. Nushagak Bay. With this bay is in southwestern Alaska with a current population. Not the bay, but the town of Clark's Point has a population of 67. Most of the residents are native Alaskans, and I believe these are Yupik. Now, one of my first questions was, what is a spit? I'm a pretty simple guy. First thing I thought of was, when you spit, like your saliva. But I have heard it used as a geological, formation. But anyway, I looked it up because I wanted to know, what is this place sitting on? And this is actually relevant in the story of Clark's Point, and you'll see why in a minute. But a spit is a narrow landform made of sand or gravel that extends from the coast into the sea or across the mouth of a bay. It is formed by the position of sediment through a process called longshore drift, where the waves move sediment along the coastline at an angle. So if you imagine waves rolling into a bay, kind of hits the shore and it makes the waves kind of roll around the edge and it creates these little peninsulas. And that is what a spit is. I think more famously, there's the Homer Spit, which I am told I need to visit. I haven't been to, but I talked to someone recently who lives near there, and he's like, yeah, you need to go to Homer. But there's a Homer Spit created by just moving water coming in from the ocean into a bay and kind of creating this sort of peninsula. So anyway, that's where this spot is of Clark's Point. And I actually thought of I think it's Massachusetts has that curlicue coming off. It's this bit of land that sticks out and it curls around. I know that spot because it's I like to study the Pilgrims, and that's where they came in. They landed on that spit over there. So anyway, Clark's Point is one of these spits. Now, originally, the point was called Saguyak by the Eskimos. And this word Saguyak means storage cache. And this usually refers to a raised platform or container to store food like fish or meat and to keep it from spoiling and keep it away from animals. However, despite the name for a storage cache, there's no evidence of occupation of Native Americans at this spot prior to the arrival of the Nushagak Packing Company, which is a fish cannery which arrived in 1888. Now, the village was named after a guy named John Clark. It's called Clark's Point. Clark was born on October 7th, 1846, and he was either born in California or in New York. It's actually not clear. But he arrived in Alaska in 1866 on the Western Union Telegraph Company Russo-American Expedition. Oh, that's a mouthful. This expedition aimed to construct a telegraph line connecting North America to Europe via Siberia. Now, I believe I've talked about this in other episodes. A handful of explorers came from this expedition. See you, bud. My son's leaving. He was in here hanging out with me. I think notably a guy named, I think his name was William Dahl, and I have his journals. He was part of this expedition also, I believe. Anyway, this particular one was about John Clark. And when he finished the expedition, he remained in Alaska and he did fur trading along the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers. By 1879, Clark had settled in Nushagak, which is a nearby village, managing a trading post for the Alaska Commercial Company. Then in 1888, he co-founded the Nushagak Canning Company at Clark's Point. And this contributed significantly to the region's economic development and helped make Bristol Bay, the larger area, a center for commercial salmon fishing. Clark passed away in December of 1896. So John Clark, there's more places named after him, which is surprising just for a head of a company. But there's Lake Clark is named after him in Lake Clark Pass. Now, Lake Clark is a stunningly beautiful place. I don't remember if it's a national park or a state park there. And it's just it's like this, ice glacier blue lake. And it's just a beautiful area. I think I've talked about it before concerning Port Ellsworth over there. All right. In 1893, the cannery in Clark's Point became a part of the Alaska Packers Association. So I looked up what that association was. It was established in 1891 and was based in San Francisco, California. The Alaska Packers Association had dozens of canneries across Alaska, a sailing fleet, and a labor force made up of Filipinos, Chinese, Scandinavian, and indigenous Alaskans, and some others. I thought that was kind of interesting because the diversity in Alaska's history is pretty incredible. There being these companies that hired people from around the world, like Filipinos, Chinese, Scandinavian, indigenous Alaskans. If you listen to, here's another bit of Alaska culture. There's people riding around in very loud dirt bikes right now, and they make a lot of noise. I got to shut my windows. I did an episode about Accutane. And in Accutane, there is the Trident Seafood Company. They hire a wide variety of people from around the world. And I know most recently they've been hiring Muslims, a lot of them like from Indonesia and places like that. And they work there. And the local pastor there who I interviewed recently is currently doing some Bible studies with the Muslims there. So I really like this part of Alaskan history that especially in the fishing industry, they historically have hired a wide diversity of people who come to Alaska for work, and really is a neat part of Alaska's history, I think. All right, so by the 1900s, this large fishing industry company was processing tens of millions of salmon annually. The company introduced a cash economy to many native villages in the area, and which this disrupted the traditional subsistence lifestyle. Now, this is just my own anecdotal observation, but it does seem like this is likely the greatest impact of cultural change among the native communities. Bringing in a cash economy over subsistence living meant big changes. So, no longer needing to have a subsistence lifestyle, which still exists even today, but a lot of it went to the wayside because of the cash economy by these big companies. So this was a huge cultural change. So instead of, having these heroic hunting or fishing stories or whale fishing stories, uh, whales aren't fish, but you know what I mean. You go on these expeditions for the subsistence lifestyle, and you create heroes. You create these legends of these heroic stories that people tell around the campfire. And there's all the, preparing this food was a community wide effort. And this was a huge cultural rich source. So when the factories come in, instead of like telling your heroic hunting stories, you're now coming home from a day of hard work at the factory. And this, of course, feels like a cultural loss. So that's just my anecdotal observation about some of the loss of the culture has to do with the cash economy and sort of the diminishment of the subsistence lifestyle in the native community. So I think that's an important part of Alaska's history and the sort of the decline of the traditional native life. There were criticism over the years of these canneries. These criticisms include the decline of fish populations in the Alaska's rivers, the harsh working conditions, low pay, and reportedly there was ethnic discrimination in these canneries. Now, the cannery operations ceased during World War II, and then only salting was done in Clark's Point. I forgot to look up what salting means. I think it means, you get the salt out of the ocean and sell it. I'm guessing. I am actually not sure. But in 1952, the plant shut down permanently, but ended up becoming headquarters for the Alaska Packers Association. Now, I looked up photographs of this facility, and I did find some pictures of it throughout history, which is pretty cool. It goes all the way back to early 1900s. There's photographs of it. The most modern photo, you can see a red-roofed building that looks pretty abandoned. It's kind of starting to fall apart. Just another reminder that all things are in entropy. They return to dust, including us. I can feel it in my body. I'm not really old yet. I'm 41, but I definitely don't feel 20 anymore. I can still do most things, but not at the level when I was younger. Like, I have to see a chiropractor sometimes. My back hurts. I don't know. It's just life, right? My parents are here visiting. Obviously, they're older than me, and they talk about aging quite a bit. And it's just anyway, this building is aging. I don't want to go down that bunny trail right now, but you can see in the older photographs, the cannery shows a very vibrant building. You can see smoke coming out of the smokestack, and so things are obviously happening. There's a dock that jets out into the water for the supply ships that are coming and going. So you can see kind of a vibrant activity there, which now it is just kind of an abandoned building. All right, in 1929 was a major event at Clark's Point. A major flood caused severe erosion at Clark's Point. Over the decades since this flood, the coast has eroded at a rate of 2.5 to 3.8 feet per year. So it's gone back. I think it said, something like in 1943, they lost over 100 feet of shore. So that's a lot. So the water's persistent march towards the village prompted a 1982 housing project, which moved the village up to higher ground, but in the same area. So despite being on higher ground, severe erosion continues to be a concern today. Now, religiously speaking, the Russian Orthodox Church seems to be the first to establish an effort at Clark's Point with a mission called Saint Innocent Enlightener of Alaska mission. That's what it was called. There is reportedly, although I couldn't find them on like Google Maps, but reportedly there is a St. John's Lutheran Church, a First Baptist Church, a United Methodist Church, and an Orthodox Church of Our Lady. All of these claim a presence in the village. However, having not been there, sometimes it seems like these reports are like these churches have, someone visited and they call it having a presence there. So I'm not really sure if all of these churches are actually there for a village of 67 people. So it's hard to know how much presence they actually have. However, I did find a record of the Moravians building a Moravian house there in 1950. Information about this specific house is very limited. I just found a mention of it. But the Moravian houses were homes for clergy to live and for community gathering spaces for the purpose of reaching the community with the gospel while integrating the gospel into local culture, language, and customs. And this was a high value for the Moravians in their ministry. So that's why I do like the Moravians. They did a lot right. There is a Catholic church there that's still there now called has a very clever name. I like the name. It's kind of like almost like a pun because it's called St. Peter the Fisherman Catholic Church. So a clever name for a fishing town. It says it is a mission of the Holy Rosary Parish in Dillingham, which is a larger village to the north of Clark's Point. The name is obviously a reference to the disciple of Jesus, Peter. And Peter was one of the more prominent disciples who wrote 2 books of the New Testament and was a fisherman. So not a bad name for a fishing village. Interestingly, the original building is located on the coast, it says, where the threat of erosion is threatening the structure, but it says it's still there. And the old structure was called St. Peter by the Sea, which is funny. It's another clever name because Peter was a fisherman in the Sea of Galilee. And of course, this structure, this old church building, is right on the sea there. So it says the old building is no longer in use, but it's still there. I did try to find the old church building on Google Earth, but I couldn't really find it. There's a lot of, looks like abandoned buildings along the coast there, but they're not labeled. So it might have been one of those. Now, on Google Earth, I could also see the remains of an old airstrip. There's not a lot of information about it, but it does look like there's an old airstrip that's been abandoned, probably because of the erosion and low elevation. But it's obvious there's another nicer airstrip nearby, 3,200 feet long, gravel airstrip. I think the orientation is 1836, so a north-south runway there. All right, so that's a good summary of Clark's Point, Alaska. Let's talk about Coffman Cove. Coffman Cove. So obviously named like Coffman, probably named after a guy, and that is interesting, which we'll get to in a second. Coffman Cove is located on the northeastern coast of Prince of Wales Island. The name Prince of Wales shows its British, or, Wales, connection there by early explorers. I actually don't know if it was Cook who named Prince of Wales Island, maybe? I would assume, but I'm not sure. He named a lot of places in Alaska. But it is way down in the panhandle of Alaska, which down there, it's like this maze of beautiful islands, kind of like a lot of, I don't know, a man's soul in me wants to go explore these. There's like a cajillion islands down there, and it looks so beautiful with these thick forest trees, just gorgeous place. When I did fly through there, just the one time when I moved to Alaska, I flew up the panhandle in my little Cessna that I had at the time. And I met a guy there who he and his wife each had a Piper Cub. And he told me that they're both pilots and they each kind of take their Cub and they have this like secret spots on beaches. So a beach in Alaska, you can land on these beaches. There's these long straight beaches. And it's a popular thing to land on the beach and camp, or, a lot of people will go searching for things that will wash up on the shores. But he told me that he and his wife will very frequently each fly their own Piper Cub out and land on a little beach spot they have. They have their own secret spots, and they land out there and have their little date nights and they relax. Like, man, that sounds just like a sweet part of the culture over there. So I've only passed through there once, but my brief time kind of stirred in me this desire to explore and wonder at all the secret little coves and niches and secret spots that local people know about. You can land and camp and all that. Sounds pretty awesome. And, endless lakes you can explore. Anyway, I wouldn't mind a visit to Coffman Cove in that area. Let's see. Coffman Cove has slowly been declining in population over the years. In 2000, there were 199 residents, and in 2020, there was 125. And so each census shows a steady decline. It is a majority white population. Now, historically, the name it was named by Lieutenant Commander A.S. Snow, U.S. Navy officer. He named it after a man named Lt Dewitt Coffman, a member of his party, while conducting hydrographic surveys along the Alaska coast while on the steamer called Carlisle P. Patterson. Coffman was a Navy man with a distinguished service record. He served in the Spanish-American War on the USS Terror. That's an awesome name for a ship, USS Terror. If you're like signing up to be in the Navy and they're like, what ship do you want to be on? You need to say, I want to be on the USS Terror because it's awesome. During World War I, he commanded the Battleship Force 2. See, this guy ended up on the best ships. This one's called the Battleship Force 2. It's awesome. That ship served on the Atlantic Fleet during World War I. During that time, he was awarded the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. Coffman passed away in 1932 in Rhode Island. So in addition to having a village named after him, the USS Coffman was a destroyer escort which served in World War II, which was named after him. So not only did this guy serve on the USS Terror and the Battleship Force 2, but then they named a ship after him, the USS Coffman. Pretty awesome, all the name stuff. Now, here's kind of an interesting thing because there is another guy named Coffman that another source claims that the village is named after this other Coffman. So here's the story of the other guy. It says that Coffman Cove was a logging camp and a mill in the 1950s by the Alaska Lumber and Pulp Company. So Robert F. Coffman was a logging executive of that company. So this source claims that the town was named after that guy. So which is it? Maybe it is both. They just luckily had the same name. So they're like, oh, it's named after R. Coffman. The Navy's like, no, it's named after R. Coffman. So I don't know. But there's two Coffmans, apparently. But being in the Tongass National Forest, which is the largest national forest in the United States, which is really interesting. There's a huge supply of lumber in this area. However, the industry went into decline due to environmental regulations set in place to protect the forest and endangered species in the area. So now today, logging still happens, but in a very small scale in Coffman Cove. So land was finally made available for private ownership in Coffman Cove when Alaska became a state in 1959. Now, I did some quick looking on Google Earth of Coffman Cove, and it does kind of reveal sort of the vibe of the village. The first thing I noticed was a handful of lodging places and sea charter businesses, which indicates that the local economy of Coffman Cove is, these little sea charters, fishing, adventurers, and lodgings. There are several docks, and notably, there's no airstrip there. So I can't just get in my plane and land over there unless I got a float plane, land in the bay there. So it seems like if you live in Coffman Cove and you don't have a boat, you probably need to have a friend with a boat to get around. There is a nearby lake called Sweetwater Lake, which does look like an outdoorsman's dream. Just a beautiful lake. If you really like that Northwoods lake feel, which I do, Sweetwater Lake looks like a dream. I also noticed a long winding road through just the very thick woods and kind of hilly terrain of this area, which connects to other villages on the island. So the village definitely has sort of the touristy, come and enjoy the remote Alaska, get your adventure fishing and kind of vibe to it. So looks like a fun place to go. This is cool. There's a significant archaeological site in the midst of Coffman Cove. It's labeled Site 49-PET-067. It's made up of pits, hearths, tools, and other cultural artifacts discovered there in the 1970s. And these are the remains of the Tlingit people who lived there long ago. Also nearby is El Capitan Cave, which is the longest mapped cave in Alaska. They mapped 2.1 miles of cave passages. And this cave was formed by erosion of limestone by acidic water, and it contains the remains of ancient brown bears, wolverines, caribou, and red foxes. Now, they say there seems to be some suggestion of human use of these caves, but nothing really definitive. There is one church in Coffman Cove, which is called Coffman Cove Community Baptist Church. And I can't see a picture of the building. It looks like a really cool log building, very Alaskan, with a steeple and a cross on top. It looks pretty cool. So this church doesn't seem to have much of an online presence, so I don't know much about it. But it does sit next to a baseball field. So nothing like a Baptist church next to a baseball field. And it makes me wonder if there's sort of a baseball as a thing in the community, which is awesome because baseball is like one of my favorite sports to play, but I haven't played it in forever. So wouldn't mind being on the Coffman Cove Fishers or whatever their name might be there in Coffman Cove, maybe with the Baptist church over there. Looks like a lot of fun. There is a ministry nearby called Miracle Bay by the Outdoors Network International, which is a site, I think it said it's like 8.8 acres for kids camps, corporate retreats, marriage getaways, family gatherings, group retreats, weddings, leadership training, and restoration. So if you're in that area, make sure you check out Miracle Bay for a getaway. That'd be cool. All right, guys, I need to wrap it up. It's getting long, but that is all I have for Clark's Point and Coffman Cove. Next week, we will be covering we're still in the seas. We're going to be doing Coho, which is located on the Kenai Peninsula. Was it Kenai or is it Kodiak? Did I get it wrong? Well, it's in one of those places. It was founded by a man who sailed all the way from Finland to Alaska. How cool is that? So we'll talk about that. And then Cold Bay. Cold Bay is out on the Aleutian Islands. It was originally a large native population. And for a while, it had the largest airport in the state of Alaska. That was pretty cool. So we're going to do that next week, Coho and Cold Bay. Thank you guys for tuning in. We are getting to know our state just one village at a time. And we're going to know how to love and pray and make our state a more lovely place to live as the gospel goes out here. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next week. We'll talk about Coho and Cold Bay. See you then.